The fluorescent lights in courtroom 4B hummed with a persistence that matched my growing anxiety. I sat rigidly in the wooden chair, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned white. Across the aisle, separated by what felt like an ocean of polished floor and broken promises, sat Marcus, my husband of 12 years, soon to be my ex-husband if he had his way. He looked confident, almost smug, in his tailored navy suit. The same suit I'd helped him pick out for his promotion 3 years ago. Back when I still believed we were building a life together. Back when I thought his late nights at the office were actually spent at the office. My attorney, Patricia Chen, sat beside me, shuffling through papers with practiced efficiency. She was good, everyone said so. But even she had warned me that without concrete evidence, divorce cases often became games of he said, she said. And Marcus had always been a gifted liar. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom collectively stood as Judge Helena Morrison entered. She was a stern-looking woman in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I'd researched her extensively. She had a reputation for fairness, but also for having little patience with dramatics or unsubstantiated claims. We settled back into our seats, and the proceedings began. Marcus's attorney, a slick-looking man named Richard Brennan, who probably charged more per hour than I made in a week, stood to present his opening statement. I watched as he painted a picture of Marcus as the devoted husband, the primary breadwinner, the man who had tried everything to save a marriage that his increasingly unstable and paranoid wife had destroyed. Each word felt like a knife: unstable, paranoid, controlling, jealous. "Your Honor," Brennan continued, his voice smooth as silk, "my client has endured months of baseless accusations. Mrs. Whitmore has accused him of infidelity without a shred of proof. She has checked his phone, followed him, interrogated him constantly. She has created a hostile home environment that has made it impossible for Mr. Whitmore to continue in this marriage. He comes before you today, not seeking to punish his wife, but simply to move forward with his life and to ensure a fair division of assets." I felt Patricia tense beside me. We both knew what was coming. "Mr. Whitmore is willing to be generous," Brennan said, glancing at his notes. "He asks only for the family home, which, as you'll see in the documentation, was purchased primarily with his earnings and a substantial gift from his parents, and a fair division of their remaining assets. He believes Mrs. Whitmore would be better served living in a smaller residence where she can seek the help she clearly needs." The help I clearly needed, as if I were the one who had shattered our vows. When it was Patricia's turn, she stood with quiet dignity. "Your Honor, my client has been faithful, devoted, and honest throughout this marriage. The accusations she has made are not the product of paranoia or jealousy, but of a woman who has seen the truth and has been gaslit into questioning her own sanity. We will demonstrate that Mr. Whitmore has been conducting an extramarital affair and has been systematically planning to leave Mrs. Whitmore with as little as possible. We ask the court to consider all evidence carefully before rendering judgment." Judge Morrison nodded, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Brennan, you may call your first witness." The defense calls Marcus Whitmore to the stand. I watched as Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket with one smooth motion, and walked to the witness stand. He placed his hand on the Bible, took the oath, and settled into the chair with the ease of someone who had nothing to hide, or someone who had practiced this moment. Brennan began his examination gently, walking Marcus through our marriage history, how we'd met at a charity fundraiser, how he'd been immediately drawn to my warmth and intelligence, how we'd built a good life together in those first years. "When did things begin to change, Mr. Whitmore?" Brennan asked. Marcus sighed, a perfect picture of regret. "About 2 years ago, Sarah started becoming suspicious. She'd go through my phone when I was in the shower. She'd call the office to check if I was really there. She'd accuse me of looking at other women when we went out." He shook his head. "At first I tried to be understanding. I thought maybe she was going through something, hormones or stress, but it got worse." My jaw clenched. Every word was a twisted version of the truth. I had started checking his phone because I'd seen a text flash across his screen one morning, a message that had disappeared before I could read it fully, but not before I'd caught the words, "Can't wait to see you tonight," followed by a heart emoji. When I'd asked about it, he'd laughed it off, said it was a coworker being inappropriate, nothing serious. But I'd known. Somewhere deep in my gut, I'd known. Can you describe how her behavior affected you? Brennan prompted. It was exhausting, Marcus said, and I had to admit, he sounded genuinely tired. I'd come home from a long day at work, and instead of having a peaceful evening, I'd be interrogated. Where was I? Who was I with? Why was I 15 minutes late? It created this atmosphere of constant tension. I started working even later just to avoid the confrontations. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. He'd started working late to avoid confrontations about working late, except he wasn't actually working. Did Mrs. Whitmore ever become physically aggressive? Brennan asked. I sat up straighter. This was new. There was one incident, Marcus said slowly, as if reluctant to speak. About 6 months ago, we were arguing, and she threw a glass at me. It missed, but it shattered against the wall. I realized then that I couldn't continue living in fear. My mouth fell open. Patricia's hand found my arm, steadying me. That night, I remembered that night. We'd been arguing because he'd missed our anniversary dinner. Again. And I hadn't thrown the glass at him. I'd slammed it down on the counter in frustration, and it had shattered. The distinction seemed important. Brennan walked Marcus through more examples, each one a careful distortion of reality. My request that he spend more time at home became controlling behavior. My tears became emotional manipulation. My completely justified questions about his whereabouts became paranoid delusions. By the time Brennan finished, I could see the sympathy in Judge Morrison's eyes. Sympathy for Marcus. Then it was Patricia's turn to cross-examine. Mr. Whitmore, she began, her voice crisp, you've testified that your wife became suspicious and controlling approximately 2 years ago. Can you think of any reason why her behavior might have changed at that specific time? Marcus shrugged. I really can't. That's what made it so difficult. There was no clear cause. Nothing had changed in your life, your work patterns, your relationships? Nothing significant, Marcus said firmly. You stated that you were working late frequently. How late? It varied. Sometimes until 8 or 9, sometimes later. I work in corporate finance. The hours can be unpredictable. And your wife had no reason to doubt that you were actually at the office during those late hours? None whatsoever. Patricia nodded slowly. Mr. Whitmore, are you currently in a relationship with anyone? A pause, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. So did Patricia. No, Marcus said. I've been focused on getting through this divorce. It wouldn't be appropriate to start something new. So you're not currently seeing anyone? That's what I said. Have you been seeing anyone at any point during your marriage to Mrs. Whitmore? No, Marcus said, his voice firm, his eyes meeting Patricia's without flinching. I have been faithful to my wife, despite her accusations. The problems in our marriage have been entirely about her inability to trust me, not about anything I've actually done. It was such a complete, confident lie that for a moment I almost doubted myself. Almost forgot about the text messages I'd glimpsed, the perfume I'd smelled on his shirts, the credit card charges at restaurants where we'd never eaten together. Almost forgot about the recording on my phone. Patricia asked a few more questions, but I could tell she was laying groundwork, not going for the kill. Not yet. When she finished, Marcus stepped down from the stand, his expression one of relief and vindication. The defense rests, Your Honor, Brennan announced. Judge Morrison turned to our side of the courtroom. Miss Chen, are you ready to present your case? Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Sarah Whitmore to the stand. My legs felt unsteady as I stood. This was it. Everything rested on the next few minutes. I walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. Patricia began gently, walking me through the same timeline from my perspective. The happy early years, the gradual changes, the growing sense that something was wrong. Mrs. Whitmore, Patricia said, your husband has testified that your suspicions were baseless. Can you explain why you believed he was being unfaithful? I took a breath. It was a lot of small things at first. Coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. Being protective of his phone in a way he never had been before. Missing important dates and events with vague excuses about work emergencies. But the real moment I knew, I paused, gathering my courage. About 8 months ago, I saw a text message on his phone. Just a glimpse before he grabbed it away. But I saw enough. Someone telling him how much they'd enjoyed the previous night and couldn't wait to see him again. What did your husband say when you asked about this message? He said it was from a client who was happy with the work he'd done on their portfolio. But the tone, it wasn't professional. I knew it wasn't. Did you have any other evidence? This was the moment. I glanced at Marcus, who was watching me with an expression of patient tolerance, like a parent indulging a child's tantrum. Yes, I said quietly. I have a recording. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted palpably. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly piqued. Marcus's expression of tolerant patience faltered, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. Brennan shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of any recording. If the plaintiff has evidence, it should have been disclosed during discovery. Patricia remained calm. Your Honor, my client only recently discovered this recording. It was made inadvertently, and she wasn't aware of its existence until 3 days ago when she was searching through old voice memos on her phone. We notified the defense immediately upon discovery, as required by law. This was technically true. I had found the recording 3 days ago, though inadvertently might have been stretching things. I'd been searching specifically for any scrap of evidence that might help my case, scrolling through months of forgotten voice memos, shopping lists, recipe ideas, reminder notes to myself, and then I'd found it. A file labeled simply with a date from 6 weeks ago, February 3rd. I'd almost deleted it without listening, assuming it was another forgotten grocery list. But something had made me tap play, and what I'd heard had changed everything. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Morrison said, how did you come to make this recording? I cleared my throat. I have a habit of using my phone's voice memo app to remind myself of things. Shopping lists, mainly, or tasks I need to remember. On February 3rd, I was in the kitchen making notes about what we needed from the store. I thought I'd stopped the recording, but I must have accidentally left it running. My phone was on the kitchen counter, and I went upstairs to put laundry away. I had no idea it was still recording. And your husband was in the kitchen during this time? Not initially. He came home while I was upstairs. I heard him come in, and I was about to go down to greet him when I heard him talking to someone on the phone. The way he was speaking, I felt my throat tighten. I stopped at the top of the stairs and listened. I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but the tone of his voice was different, intimate. After he ended the call, I waited a few minutes before coming down, pretending I hadn't heard anything. And this entire conversation was captured on your phone, which you'd left in the kitchen? Yes, Your Honor. I didn't remember I'd left it recording until I found the file 3 days ago. Brennan stood again. Your Honor, I must object to the admission of this recording. My client had a reasonable expectation of privacy in his own home. Recording someone without their knowledge or consent violates California's privacy laws. Patricia was ready. Your Honor, California is a two-party consent state for conversations where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. However, Mrs. Whitmore was present in the home, and the recording was made inadvertently in a common area, the kitchen, not in a private space where Mr. Whitmore could reasonably expect complete privacy. Furthermore, the recording is directly relevant to the issues before this court, specifically Mr. Whitmore's credibility regarding his alleged affair. Under the circumstances, we believe the probative value outweighs any privacy concerns. Judge Morrison considered this. Mr. Brennan, your client has testified under oath that he has been faithful throughout the marriage. If this recording contradicts that testimony, it goes directly to his credibility before this court. I'll allow it, but I'll need to hear it before making a final determination on its admissibility. Ms. Chen, please proceed. My hands trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket. Patricia had already loaded the file and tested the courtroom's audio system. She took the phone from me, connected it, and nodded to indicate she was ready. For the record, Patricia said, this is a recording made on February 3rd, 2024, beginning at approximately 3:47 p.m. Mrs. Whitmore, can you identify the voices on this recording? Yes, I said. The first voice is my husband, Marcus Whitmore. The second voice on the phone, I believe, belongs to a woman named Jennifer Hartley. She works at the same company as Marcus. Marcus's face had gone pale. Brennan leaned over to whisper something to him urgently. Patricia pressed play. The first sound was my own voice, distant and distracted, running through a shopping list. Milk, eggs, bread, that pasta sauce Marcus likes. Then rustling sounds as I presumably moved around the kitchen. Footsteps ascending stairs. Silence for perhaps 30 seconds, broken only by the ambient sounds of an empty room, the hum of the refrigerator, a clock ticking somewhere. Then the distinctive sound of a door opening. Marcus's voice, clear and cheerful. "Hey, it's me." "No, I'm alone. Sarah's upstairs somewhere. We've got at least 20 minutes. A pause while the person on the other end spoke. Then Marcus laughed, that deep, genuine laugh that I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. The laugh that had become increasingly rare at home, but apparently flowed freely elsewhere. I know. I miss you too. Last night was incredible." Another pause. No, she didn't suspect anything. I told her I had a client dinner. She barely even asked about it anymore. I think she's given up trying to catch me. My chest tightened, listening to it again, even though I'd heard it dozens of times over the past 3 days. Each time, it hurt just as much. Marcus's voice continued. "The divorce is moving forward. My lawyer thinks we'll be done within 3 months, maybe sooner if Sarah doesn't drag things out. She doesn't have any real evidence, just her paranoid suspicions. And Brennan is good. He's making her look unstable. By the time this is over, I'll get the house, most of the assets, and she'll be lucky to walk away with enough for a decent apartment." The courtroom was silent except for the recording. I couldn't look at Marcus, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning with a mixture of shock and rage. "No, don't worry about money," Marcus continued, his tone reassuring. "Once the divorce is final, I'll have plenty. We can finally start our life together properly. Maybe take that trip to Tuscany you've been talking about." A pause, then a laugh. "Yeah, with her money. She helped pay for half the house, worked her ass off for 12 years, but according to California law and my lawyer's strategy, most of it's going to end up with me. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? She's so busy looking crazy and jealous that the judge is going to see her as the problem. Classic misdirection." In the recording, there was a sound of footsteps on stairs. My footsteps, presumably, though I'd been careful to be quiet. Marcus's voice changed abruptly, becoming hushed. "I've got to go. She's coming down. I'll call you later. Yes, I love you too." A beep as the call ended. Then Marcus's voice, louder and casual. "Sarah, I'm home!" The recording continued for a few more seconds with ambient sounds before finally cutting off. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Morrison's expression had transformed from neutrally professional to something much harder. "Mr. Whitmore, would you like to explain what we just heard?" Marcus had recovered some of his composure, though his face remained pale. "Your Honor, that recording is taken out of context." "Out of context?" Judge Morrison's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "Mr. Whitmore, I just heard you admit to conducting an affair, lying to this court, and deliberately attempting to manipulate these proceedings. What context could possibly excuse that?" Brennan stood. "Your Honor, my client." "Sit down, Mr. Brennan." The judge's tone brooked no argument. "Mr. Whitmore, stand up." Marcus stood, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "You came into my courtroom and took an oath to tell the truth," Judge Morrison said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You then proceeded to lie directly to me about the state of your marriage, about your fidelity, and about your wife's mental state. You attempted to manipulate these proceedings to defraud your wife of her rightful share of marital assets. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Your Honor, I made a mistake. The affair, it was a moment of weakness, but that doesn't change the fact that Sarah has been difficult to live with." "Difficult to live with because she correctly suspected you were cheating on her," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Because she was living with a husband who was lying to her daily while planning to betray her in every possible way." She turned to Brennan. "Counselor, I suggest you take a moment to confer with your client. and you might want to discuss whether he understands the implications of committing perjury in my courtroom." The judge called a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, I sat frozen in place, Patricia's hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. "You really did it." I watched Marcus huddle with Brennan in the corner, their conversation clearly heated. Brennan's face was red, his gestures sharp and angry. Marcus looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. "What happens now?" I asked. Patricia smiled. Actually smiled. "Now? Now we win." When court reconvened 15 minutes later, the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, no longer the confident man who had taken the stand earlier. Brennan looked like he'd aged 5 years in 15 minutes. Even the court reporter sat a little straighter, clearly aware that she was witnessing something unusual. Judge Morrison took her seat and surveyed the courtroom. "Mr. Brennan, have you had adequate time to consult with your client?" Brennan stood, and I could see him mentally recalibrating his entire strategy. "Yes, Your Honor, my client would like to address the court." "I'm sure he would," Judge Morrison said dryly. "However, before we proceed, I need to address several matters. First, Mr. Whitmore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential perjury charges. You lied under oath in my courtroom, and there will be consequences for that beyond these divorce proceedings." Marcus's face went gray. I watched him grip the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Second," the judge continued, "I am formally disregarding all of Mr. Whitmore's testimony regarding his wife's alleged instability, controlling behavior, and paranoia. The recording makes clear that Mrs. Whitmore's suspicions were not only justified, but that Mr. Whitmore deliberately used her justified concerns to paint her as mentally unstable. This is, quite frankly, one of the more egregious cases of gaslighting I've encountered in my years on the bench." Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. I was afraid to believe this was real, afraid that somehow Marcus would still find a way to twist things in his favor. He always had before. "Third," Judge Morrison said, "we need to address the issue of marital assets. Mr. Brennan, I assume your client's position on property division has evolved?" Brennan stood again. "Your Honor, in light of the new evidence, my client is willing to discuss a more equitable division of assets." "How magnanimous," the judge said, her sarcasm unmistakable. "Ms. Chen, what is your client seeking?" Patricia rose, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice even as she maintained her professional demeanor. "Your Honor, given that Mr. Whitmore admitted on the recording that he was deliberately attempting to defraud my client of her fair share of marital assets, and given that he has lied extensively to this court, we believe Mrs. Whitmore is entitled to more than a standard 50-50 division. We're requesting 60% of all marital assets, including the family home, which Mrs. Whitmore contributed equally to purchasing and maintaining. Additionally, we're requesting that Mr. Whitmore cover all of Mrs. Whitmore's legal fees, given that his dishonesty necessitated these proceedings." "Your Honor, that's excessive," Brennan began. Judge Morrison held up a hand. "Mr. Brennan, your client came into my courtroom and attempted to commit fraud. He tried to manipulate the legal system to steal from his wife while portraying her as mentally unstable. If anything, Ms. Chen is being conservative in her requests." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Whitmore, do you understand that if we proceed to a full, contested hearing with what I've heard today, you are likely to walk away with far less than what is being proposed right now?" Marcus looked at Brennan, who gave a tight nod. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I strongly suggest you and your attorney use the lunch recess to discuss settlement options. Court is adjourned until 2 p.m. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that felt like the sound of justice being served. The courthouse cafeteria was a dismal space with fluorescent lighting and the lingering smell of overcooked coffee, but I barely noticed. Patricia and I sat at a corner table, going over documents and discussing strategy, though the outcome seemed suddenly, miraculously clear. "I can't believe it," I kept saying. "I can't believe it actually worked." "The truth has a way of doing that," Patricia said, though she was smiling. "I have to admit, Sarah, when you first told me about finding that recording, I was cautiously optimistic. But hearing it in court, seeing Marcus's face, that was even better than I'd hoped." I picked at a sandwich I couldn't taste. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving behind a hollow feeling that I recognized as the beginning of grief. Not for Marcus, I'd grieved that marriage long ago, but for the 12 years I'd invested in a partnership that had been built on lies. "Do you think he'll settle?" I asked. "Oh, he'll settle," Patricia said confidently. "Brennan knows that if this goes any further, Marcus could lose everything. Plus, there's the perjury investigation now. Marcus's best bet is to agree to terms, sign the papers, and hope the DA decides not to prosecute."